As the favoured weapon of the Shinigami, the Zanpakuto has been the conduit for some of the most exciting and creative abilities we have seen throughout Bleach. But as we know, the Zanpakuto is more than just a weapon. It's also a Shinigami's partner and a embodiment of their own soul. And because of that, some of these abilities are exceptionally powerful and frankly devastating, and yet even broken to behold, with some Bankai being ridiculously strong, some Shikai being ridiculously strong. And so to that end, I want to, in this video, rank what I believe to be the top 10 strongest Zanpakuto throughout the entire series, and perhaps even beyond that as well. I will only be dealing with canon material, and we also aren't talking about Arrancar Zanpakuto in this video either. Probably do a separate video for Resurrections at some point, but this is going to be looking solely at Shinigami Zanpakuto, including Shikai and Bankai. And the criteria we're going to be using here is looking at the overall versatility of the sword, its abilities, its destructive potential, its strength, its on-screen feats. There's a lot here to go into and unpack regarding the Zanpakuto, so let's just crack on with this video. Before we begin, however, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you're in the right place if you love Bleach. Just hit that button and the notification bell, and you'll keep getting Bleach videos every week. And what more could you want than that? Obviously, leave a comment below, guys. I'm not expecting everyone to agree with this list. That's the good thing about rankings. Everyone has an opinion. I'd love to know yours. So please let me know in the comments below what Zanpakuto you think deserve to be ranked in the top 10 strongest. I'll be very intrigued to see what you guys think number one is, because honestly I think there's a couple of options here, and we'll dive deeper into that as we go further into the video. So without further ado, let's begin. The 10th strongest Zanpakuto in Bleach, in my opinion, is Byakuya Kuchiki's Senbonzakura. Now, Senbonzakura is a Zanpakuto we have seen many times in the series. It's one of the Zanpakuto that is privy to a heavy amount of exposure. We know pretty much everything this Zanpakuto can do, which I think really helps. In its Shikai form, Senbonzakura, it basically takes the form of millions of blades that look like cherry blossom petals. Very cool design for starters, but in terms of its actual destructive capabilities, we have seen this firsthand. Especially Byakuya's Bankai Senbonzakura Kageyoshi, we've seen it take on numerous opponents in the past. Starting from as early as the Soul Society arc, we see Renji get one-shotted by Byakuya's Bankai. We see him take on Ichigo with his devastating Senkei ability and even his Shukei Hakuteken power, which, to be honest, put Byakuya on such a high pedestal in terms of abilities. It was hard to see how anyone could match him at the time. Further into the series, we've seen abilities like Gokei used against the Espada Zamari, and we've even seen the devastating effects of Byakuya's Bankai turned against him in the Thousand Year Blood War. Coming back from his training in the Royal Realm, Byakuya has refined Senbonzakura even further. Now its Shikai form looks like its Bankai form, at least according to Asnot. And not only that, but Byakuya is strong enough at this point to use his Bankai to take on multiple Sternritters. And finally, his final ability, Senkei Ogi Ika Senjika, is strong enough to obliterate the head of Gerard Valkyrie, who, if you've seen in my Sternritter ranking video, I put pretty high up on that list. For me, Senbonzakura makes it onto this list for a number of reasons. It's incredibly versatile with a huge amount of abilities at its disposal, but even in its basic form, Senbonzakura has so many uses, whether that's defensive, Byakuya can use the petals to defend himself from attacks, or go all out and absolutely devastate his opponent, as we've seen in nearly every fight he's in. Perhaps this is more down to Byakuya as a fighter than just his Zanpakuto, but it's really interesting seeing it used in a creative way against Tsukishima when he has to catch his own Zanpakuto's blades and then use them with a more, some would say, forceful twist. Therefore, I think putting Senbonzakura on the top 10 list is only fair. Coming in at number 9 is the powerful Ice Zanpakuto Hyorimaru. Hyorimaru is of course wielded by the fan favourite Toshiro Hitsugaya. It's got a really awesome design for starters, and its Bankai, Daigoren Hyorimaru, allows Hitsugaya to gain the attributes of an ice dragon. Now, whether this is just down to Hitsugaya's popularity as a character or not, we have been heavily exposed to Hyorimaru throughout the series. This thing has an unlimited number of abilities at its disposal, it seems, ranging from Hyoten Hyakoso to Senen Hyoru, to Guncho Surara, to Ryusenka, to ice clones. I mean, it's pretty much unlimited what Hyorimaru can actually do, and that's without even touching upon the adult Hitsugaya transformation that comes when his Bankai is fully mature. Any perceived weaknesses that Hyorimaru might have, for instance, the majority of enemies that get frozen by this seem to come out mostly okay on the other side, I would put down probably to Hitsugaya's inexperience and the fact that he is pretty young. Hyorimaru is obviously insanely powerful, and there aren't many Ice Zanpakuto to compare it to, but the fact that it has the power to control the weather as well, as we see with Hyoten Hyakuso in the Fate Karakura Town arc, really means that this Zanpakuto is ridiculously strong. And I think the main thing here is clearly its versatility. It seems to be able to do almost everything with a litany of abilities at its disposal. Number 8 then is where things start to get really interesting in my opinion, and this Zanpakuto is Enrakyoten, which belongs to Tokinada Suna Yashiro. To be more precise, it actually belongs to the Suna Yashiro noble family, much in the way that the Issei sword Shinken Hyakoten, which Nanao wields in the final arc, actually belongs to her family and not to her. Now, if you haven't read Can't For Your Own World, Tokinada is actually the villain of that story, and he's had his own Zanpakuto confiscated from him, so he steals the Suna Yashiro family Zanpakuto instead. The way Tokinada wields Enrakyoten is actually similar to how Yumachika uses Ruariro Kujaku. He uses essentially a false Shikai by calling it a slightly different name, and in this form, it's nothing really that special. It has the ability to bounce powers back, essentially a worse version of Ukitake's Sogyo no Kotowari because it doesn't come with any of the additional trappings that that sword does. However, it's its true form that gets it the 8th place on this list, and this is a really powerful, but I think kind of balanced ability that puts Tokinada in quite a position of power when he fights someone. So Enrakyoten's real ability is the power to mimic the powers of the opponent it is facing and then scale that Reiatsu to match Tokinada. Let's say, for example, Tokinada was fighting Vice Captain. Now, in the book, he obviously fights Hisagi, so Enrakyoten is able to mimic the powers of Kazashini, but then scale up the Reiatsu to match Tokinada, which immediately means anyone with less Reiatsu than Tokinada is in really big trouble, because Enrakyoten does all the legwork for him, essentially. The big weakness to Enrakyoten, however, is pretty obvious, I think. If he was to fight someone like Yamamoto, sure, he would gain the powers of Ryujin Jaka to some degree, but the Reiatsu would be scaled down so hard to match Tokinada that Yamamoto would still almost certainly win that fight, I think. That's not to say Tokinada's weak, he's certainly no pushover, but it is a weakness inherent to Enrakyoten itself. What's utterly absurd about Enrakyoten, however, is that it can actually mimic more than one power at once. In Can't For Your Own World, Tokinada manages to take on the abilities of many different Shinigami, giving him an utter plethora of powers to choose from. Of course, there is a downside, however, and the more powers Enrakyoten mimics, the weaker those individual powers become. This is what I mean when I say Enrakyoten feels quite balanced to me. It's very, very powerful, and frankly, it is kind of broken in a lot of ways, but the fact that it has to scale to match Tokinada's Reiatsu, the fact that the individual powers can be weakened, and the biggest weakness, in my opinion, the fact that it drains the wielder's life force, really stops Enrakyoten from rising any higher on this list. It's a powerful blade, wielded, of course, by a pretty powerful individual, but it does have a number of weaknesses that stop it from achieving true greatness, so I think 8th is a good spot for that sword. Now, number 7 on this list might be the most contentious of them all, and I'll be completely honest with you guys, I did not know where to place this guy, and I think you'll understand when you find out who it is. Number 7 is the main character, Ichigo Kurosaki, and his Zhang Getsu. Now, Zhang Getsu is, of course, the Zanpakuto we have spent the most time with throughout the entire series. We've seen the trajectory of its power, and we've also seen the origins of its power as well. At least when the series begins, Zhang Getsu is little more really than a blunt instrument, but it is clearly incredibly powerful. Ichigo's able to use it to defeat captains like Kenpachi and Byakuya, and Zhang Getsu is definitely a conduit for Ichigo's own massive Reiatsu. Admittedly, its only real ability seems to be the Getsuga Tensho, but that is very powerful in and of itself as well, and Ichigo's original Bankai gives him a massive speed boost capable of countering even Senbonzakura Kageyoshi. Now, admittedly, the way Zangetsu is used and portrayed kind of fluctuates throughout the series, and I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that Ichigo's own power is very turbulent, and it becomes very difficult to place him on a list like this. Obviously, when we get to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, we discover the truth about Ichigo's Zanpakuto. It was never really a true Zanpakuto in the first place, and when he finally does get an Asauchi of his own, it is a mixture of his Shinigami and Hollow powers. The Hollow within is actually Zangetsu. White is his Zanpakuto spirit. So does that mean that when we consider the power of Zangetsu itself, do we have to consider the monstrous Hollow form that fought Ulquiorra? Well, I don't know really, because it's very difficult to say if that was a manifestation of Zangetsu or if that was more the Hollow side of things and Ichigo's instincts. It's really difficult to say, but it's clear regardless that Zangetsu has an just frankly enormous amount of base power. During the Lost Agent arc, when Ichigo gets his powers back, we can see this in full force. The size of the Getsuga Tenshos that he is unleashing is just ridiculously off the charts, although admittedly they're never that big again, which is kind of weird, and this kind of all goes back to what I say about Zangetsu being very inconsistent in the way it's portrayed in the series. When Ichigo does finally get his true Shikai and his eventually true Bankai, we can see all of his powers in balance in the form of a couple of swords. So you have to assume then that the main Zanpakuto he has when he starts dual wielding is a combination of his Hollow and his Shinigami powers. So does that mean again then that the Gran Rei Sero he uses can be attributed to Zangetsu or just to Ichigo himself? So that's why it's really confusing. I'm not sure if I've undersold Zangetsu by putting him here at 7. It's just really hard to say, especially when the guys above this have considerably more concrete powers and abilities. One thing we absolutely can't discard, however, about Zangetsu is that it does contain pretty much the single most powerful ability in Bleach, in the final Getsuga Tensho and its Mugetsu ability. Mugetsu has the power to pretty much cleave through anything. It is a one-shot, one-kill move. It's able to split a third dimension Transcendence Aizen straight down the middle, removing all of his powers in the process because it's just such an enormous attack. Admittedly, Aizen doesn't die, but you have to remember it's nearly impossible to kill him at this point anyway. Of course, Mugetsu does come with an enormous drawback, however, that it robs the user of all of their powers, and it is really not easy to get them back either. It takes Ichigo quite a while for his Shinigami powers to kind of restart and reboot, and then he gets a big jump start from the rest of the Shinigami. So Mugetsu is probably the single strongest attack in the series, but it has enormous caveats that the guys above this just don't seem to suffer from. As for Ichigo himself, well, he doesn't really use Zangetsu to its truest potential, in my opinion. We get to see White spinning it around and throwing it, and Ichigo, although observing this, never uses techniques like these. So in my opinion, Zangetsu is often never used to its fullest potential. Ichigo is content instead to basically just use Getsuga Tensho, and then eventually Getsuga Jujisho much later on down the line. So while I think Zangetsu is a very, very powerful Zanpakuto, with a obviously absurdly powerful wielder, I don't think it's ever used to its fullest potential. I'm not sure you can really count the kind of hollow parts of that as part of the Zanpakuto. It's honestly really confusing. If you disagree with me on that, please let me know. Maybe I should be ranking Zangetsu higher in this list, but his powers are so nebulous. Mate, I don't know. I just don't know if you can really consider it the Zanpakuto that comes out, or if that's just the holification aspect of things. Obviously, Ichigo is a perfect hybrid, so it muddies the waters quite a bit. I'm content with putting him at 7th now, but in the future, if we do another one of these videos, I've got no problem bumping Ichigo up a couple of places if we all kind of decide that maybe Zangetsu is being undersold here. But really, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, like I said, I'm happy with 7th for now for Ichigo. The 6th strongest Zanpakuto on this list is a personal favourite of mine, and that is Benihime, Urahara Kisuke's Crimson Princess. Now, Benihime might not look like much, but this Zanpakuto is one of the most versatile in the entire series, with some really cool abilities, and I always found it really hard to kind of gauge what Benihime's power was, particularly in Shikai. It can fire energy blasts, which, by the way, make a really cool firework sound. It can also create the Blood Mist Shield, which Urahara uses in the third movie. Urahara can also use it to create netting. He can then infuse that with bombs. Really, it seems like the Shikai version of Benihime is just limitless in what it can do. When you see its Bankai, of course, this does actually make sense, and Canon Biraki Benihime Aratame is one of my favourite Bankais in the series. It's a very, very simplistic Bankai. I love that it only has one ability, but it's an ability that allows Urahara to do anything. I think that's incredibly clever. Benihime's Bankai allows Urahara to restructure anything it touches, and it has a range. We see it peel apart Askin's arm. We see it create essentially a portal for Grimmjow to move through. Probably the most interesting one I see is when Urahara uses his Bankai on himself. So he restructures his own eyes to bring back his sight. And he also restructures his own arm to make it physically stronger and then be able to beat down Askin with it. The possibilities of Canon Biraki Benihime Aratame are so limitless that I was considering actually putting it higher on this list purely for its Bankai. Benihime is an incredibly dangerous Zanpakuto wielded by an incredibly dangerous man, but I wonder if there are limits to what Canon Biraki Benihime Aratame can actually achieve, and whether those limits are constrained by how much Reiatsu Urahara has. So obviously in his fight with Askin, when he uses his Bankai, he's pretty much in control the whole time. Interestingly, however, I wonder though, when he increases the physical strength of his arm, how far can that go? Could he do that to match the strength of someone like Kenpachi, or is that goal just too far out of his reach? I don't know. That would be really interesting to see. Based on the information we have, however, so far, I think 6th is pretty fair for the Zanpakuto that can apparently do it all. I wonder if it's fair to say that this Zanpakuto can bend reality? I don't know, like definitely in his Bankai it seems like that. I'm not sure about the Shikai, though the Shikai is very weird, but definitely one of my favourites. And so we reach the top 5 strongest Zanpakuto on this list. This is where I really expect the contention to come in. But like I said before, guys, leave your rankings in the comments below. I always love to see what you guys have to say. So, number 5 on the list then. And the 5th strongest Zanpakuto on this list is Kenpachi Zaraki's Nozarashi. Now, Nozarashi, in my opinion, is very similar to Zhang Getsu. It doesn't have any versatility, and that's absolutely fine. We all know the kind of fighter that Kenpachi is, and I think Nozarashi suits him really, really well. In the strength department, I think Nozarashi is completely unmatched, except for potentially who I've put at number 1, but we'll see. But in terms of like pure cutting power, there is nothing that Nozarashi cannot cut through, whether that's a meteor, whether that's the fabric of space itself. Nozarashi can just cleave it in two. His Bankai, which I thought was really cool how it was left unnamed, turns Kenpachi into essentially a berserker demon. He becomes like an Oni, his skin goes red, he grows horns, and I love the symbolism here, but what's important is, of course, the strength that this thing displays, and he absolutely wails on Gerard Valkyrie. What's important, of course, to remember, Gerard is still only in base at this point. He only goes Volsendig after he gets cut in half by Kenpachi. But the fact that Kenpachi's Bankai is able to even cleave Gerard in half with apparently no problems whatsoever really proves just how powerful this behemoth of the Zanpakuto actually is. So the main reason it's 5th on this list is I just think that the Zanpakuto ahead of it have so much more utility, so much more versatility under their belts, but there is really no denying that in terms of raw strength, raw cutting power, Nozarashi has to be at the top on this list. But I think overall, 5th is pretty fair, but let me know where you'd rank Nozarashi. And the 4th strongest Zanpakuto on my list is the current Captain Commander's Zanpakuto, Shunsui Kyoraku's Katen Kyokotsu. Katen Kyokotsu is kind of as broken as they come. It's probably one of the most interesting Zanpakuto in the series as well, with the ability to bring children's games into reality. Definitely incredibly creative. I know I never expected this from Kubo, but Shunsui Zanpakuto is a beast that plays quite literally by its own rules. Now, even in Shikai mode, it's exceptionally powerful, with just so many potential abilities under its belt. There's Kage Oni, which means that if you step on a shadow, you instantly get wounded. Taka Oni, which means that anyone who's above the other opponent can apparently win a fight, although we never really see it in action. Busho Goma, which is basically a wind ability that just surrounds the opponent like a spinning top. Daruma Sangakuronda, which basically means that Shunsui can teleport to an opponent and attack them directly if they so much as look at his shadow. And Iro Oni, the colour game that Shunsui uses to defeat Stark. So as you can see, there's just a mind-boggling number of exceptionally powerful abilities here, and that's just the Shikai. Even though he does play a bit dirty to get a hit in on Stark, there's no denying that Kyoraku's Shikai is as strong as many people's Bankais, and it is enough to kill the Primera Espada. And we haven't even talked about his Bankai yet, the ever-wondrous, whimsical Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju. No one's even really sure how this thing works, but it is undeniably very powerful. Basically what it is it's a theatre play about a story of two lovers who eventually commit almost like a suicide pact, and each stage triggers the next. So I have to assume that if the first stage didn't trigger, the Bankai would just not work. But obviously the only example we get, we see the whole thing. So if you take damage from the Sharing Wounds ability, that triggers the next ability, which is the plague, essentially, that covers you in boils and blood. Then you both get thrown into a massive abyss of water, which drains both Reiatsu and Resolve. And then finally, if the Bankai is pushed to the fourth stage, it's a one-hit kill where Kyoraku cuts off your head. So, in my opinion, this Bankai is just so ridiculous, it's so overpowered, and I like the way each ability plays into the next. So if you end up falling down this rabbit hole, there's less and less chance you're coming out the other side alive. And I really love that. I love the idea of both players in this game being dragged down to the depths until one of them dies. And I think that's really, really cool. I don't think Kubo showcased Kyoraku's Bankai in the best way possible, but I love what he's getting across. And I think you can't deny the sheer versatility and power of Katen Kyokotsu. It's enough to kill Stark in Shikai. It's enough to remove the head of the leader of the Schutzstaffel. It's not Shunsui's fault that this guy was immortal. You know, Nozarashi couldn't kill an immortal guy either, so it's really hard to kind of compare them on that front. But I think that Kyoraku's sword deserves to be fourth on this list. Whew, it is going to take a lot to beat Nozarashi and Katen Kyokotsu, but I think we've got it with the top three. So before we hit the top three, remember I have got a Twitter account. You can follow the link in the description, follow me there. And also we do now have a Discord for the channel. So many of you guys have joined and so many of you have been incredibly helpful. We're taking in your feedback. We're improving the Discord every day, hopefully. So it's a great place for you to come and chat Bleach, and you can talk about this video on there and let me know how wrong you think my ranking is. I would appreciate that. So the top three then, the third strongest Zanpakuto in Bleach. And number 3 is the Zanpakuto of my favourite character, Aizen Sosuke, and his Kyoka Suigetsu. For the longest time, I think Kyoka Suigetsu was probably considered the single most broken Zanpakuto in all of Bleach. It essentially has no downside. Basically, Aizen can just say the release command and you fall under his spell, unless you happen to be holding the blade. I always thought that was pretty arbitrary. I feel like Kubo invented that almost on the spot just to give Gin a way out, but nonetheless, that's the only way you could ever hope to stop Kyoka Suigetsu, and you would only know that if Aizen told you, which is, he told Gin apparently. Again, someone as careful as Aizen, I find that really hard to believe, but he did do it anyway. So what's important is that Kyoka Suigetsu has no discernible weakness unless you happen to know about it. Once you're under its spell, Aizen is able to control all 5 of your senses. What you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you touch, it's all there. What you taste, literally every single sense is encapsulated by Kyoka Suigetsu. As Aizen says himself, a swamp can become a flower garden, or I think it's like a fly can become like a dragon or something like that. But either way, it's a completely absurd power that is apparently inescapable. This Zanpakuto, in its Shikai state, is strong enough to thwart Yuha's the Almighty, which I think is just an incredible feat in and of itself. Obviously, we never found out Aizen's Bankai, so it's a testament to his Shikai's brokenness that it's third on this list. It's useful in almost every single situation. He uses it to easily defeat Harabel. He uses it to confuse the entire Gotei 13 into attacking and nearly killing Momo. And there's, like I said, there's no downside to this power. Aizen has to put you under it once, and then you never know if it's being used on you again. So Zhang Getsu is absurdly powerful. Kubo kind of wrote himself into a corner with this sword, I think, that he just made it so broken. Obviously, if you're battle-hardened and you're smart enough about it, like Yamamoto was, interestingly, there are kind of ways to circumvent it. When Aizen stabs Yama and Yama grabs Aizen, he's like, I might not be able to see or feel anything around me that is real, but I know this is your Reiatsu. So I always thought that was interesting. It's not so much a weakness of the sword, it's more Yama being smart about things. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Zhang Getsu, absurdly powerful and pretty fitting for the god of Bleach. So much as it was with the top two Sternritters, I have had quite a bit of trouble with the top two Zanpakuto, and I've deliberated about this quite a bit. I think it can go either way. I think if you were to put these two in a fight, the battle would be decided by what happens first. If one of these guys was to land a hit on the other, they would probably win. If the other person was to go Bankai, they would probably win. So let's go into this, let's discuss this and see if you guys agree with my placement. I'm going to try and make an argument for this, and we will go from there. So the second strongest Zanpakuto in Bleach is... Yes, the second strongest Zanpakuto belongs to the leader of the Zero Division himself, Ichibe Hyosobe, and it is his sword, Ichimonji. Ichimonji is a very creative Zanpakuto, and it is utterly unlike anything we have ever seen in Bleach before. Its power, its base form starts out as a massive brush, like a calligraphy brush, and when it goes into Shikai, it gains a blade at the top, but its ability is actually similar to that of a brush. As Yuha says when he fights Ichibe, as Ichibe is swinging the sword, it's not really doing anything but splashing ink everywhere. Ichibe then reveals that the sword doesn't cut flesh, it cuts names. And I remember reading this and being like, what is going on here? This is ridiculously powerful. Because apparently, we find out that everything in Bleach, the power is in the name. And obviously this makes loads of sense because you activate your Zanpakuto by calling out its name, etc, etc. So Ichibe has the power to cut names. So he cuts Yuha's arm, and it's a little harder in English because obviously in Japanese they write, in like kanji, for instance, which is actually an image which can be visibly cut in half. So in English, if the word arm is reduced to just R, Yuha's arm loses half of its strength. And it's like, that is absurdly powerful. Ichibe has the power to essentially splash someone with ink and erase their abilities. They lose all their strength. And we see that against Yuha, and he loses everything. And then Ichibe activates his Bankai, Shirafude Ichimonji, and at which point he can then rewrite your name and assign you a new one. He gives Yuha the name Black Ant, which basically makes him literally as strong as an ant, although I've never really understood that. I don't understand how he doesn't instantly die the moment Ichibe kicks him after that, but it doesn't really matter. One weird thing about Ichimonji is I've always kind of wondered what the point in the Bankai was, and I know that sounds weird, but Ichimonji allows you to erase names. So at that point, your opponent doesn't have any powers. So why would you then give them a new one? Even if it's Black Ant, that's more than nothing. So I've always found that kind of weird, unless maybe I'm misinterpreting it, I'm not entirely sure. Either way, Ichibe is in a position where if he was to fight literally anyone, he can cover them in ink and have them lose their ability. And of course, this makes sense. He's one of the progenitor Shinigami. He is one of the first spiritual beings to ever be in the Bleach universe. His sword is clearly going to be exceptionally powerful. And the fact that he is the person who gives the names to everything, he is the monk of perception, this makes perfect sense to me. And I think it's only fair that the leader of the Royal Guard has a Zanpakuto that is frankly as divine as this. So who then could possibly be number one? And obviously you know who it is by now, I would assume. And again, it kind of comes down to mitigating circumstances, but I really do believe that this Zanpakuto is unrivaled in what we have seen in Bleach so far, but both in terms of Shikai and Bankai. So let's get into it. Yes, the most powerful Zanpakuto in Bleach belongs to Yamamoto Shigakuni Genryusai, the original Captain Commander of the Soul Society for over 1,000 years, and his Zanpakuto is the Fire Ryujin Jaka. Now, we've seen Ryujin Jaka a few times throughout the series, and every time we see it, it's a total spectacle. Kubo goes out of his way to showcase the raw energy and power of this blade every time Yamamoto releases it. Even Shikai is a huge deal, and its command is reduce all of creation to ash. Much like many of the swords that have come before, Ryujin Jaka has just an absolute plethora of abilities, whether that's Jokaku Enjo, Enetsu Jigoku, Nadagiri, like these powers just go on. And every single one of them is apparently more powerful than the last. Jokaku Enjo allows him to trap people in apparently an inescapable fiery fortress, while Enetsu Jigoku literally brings up these tempestuous pillars of flame, apparently enough to annihilate an entire city. Both of the big bads in the series, Aizen and Yuha, had to prepare special measures to deal with Ryujin Jaka. Aizen created Wonder Weiss just to extinguish Yamamoto's flame, and Yuha used the Roid Lloyd twist to wear Yamamoto down before defeating him himself. Let's not forget as well that Yamamoto's captured flames inside Wonder Weiss's head were enough to destroy the entire of Karakura town if that bomb had gone off. Yamamoto's sword is absurd in every sense of the word. It's clearly designed to be this godlike flame which everybody fears. Every time it goes off, everyone in the vicinity is like freaking out no matter what. And that is just the Shikai. We haven't even started yet, guys. Yamamoto's Bankai, Zanka no Tachi, is ridiculous. And I can't begin to tell you how happy I was that we actually saw this thing in full. And it's really Zanka no Tachi that puts Yamamoto above Ichibe. I still believe that were Ichibe to cover Yamamoto in ink, he probably would win that fight. But if Yamamoto was already in Bankai, if he'd already activated Zanka no Tachi West and covered himself in a fiery shield, I don't think the ink would even get anywhere near him. I think it'd be very similar to when Roid tries to strike Yamamoto and his sword is just erased from existence. In his Bankai, Yamamoto has access to 4 different abilities. East, which is the first one we see, and it can already erase stuff from existence as though it were never there to begin with. Every single flame Yamamoto has is concentrated on the edge of the blade, and the moment it touches anything, it's gone. It's just gone from existence. There's nothing left. Not only that, but Yamamoto has access to, as I said, West, which generates a fiery shield essentially around Yamamoto, although it actually turns his body into flames. He is literally breathing fire out of his mouth, and it's so hot that getting anywhere near it reduces things to ash, essentially. So that's why I think that Ichibe wouldn't be able to approach Yamamoto in that situation. Then we have Zanka no Tachi North, which is basically a move. It's basically a big glorified sword swing, but it's enough to kill Roid in essentially one hit. And then we have the most impressive move, most visually insane ability in Yamamoto's arsenal, Zanka no Tachi South Kaka Jumanakushi Dai Sojin, I think is how it's pronounced. Just did that off the top of my head. Really hoping that's right. But basically, he raises the dead. I mean, it doesn't get any crazier than that. His flames ignite the hearts and bones of the enemies he has killed, and they rise up to fight for him. I mean, is that not just the most metal ability you've ever seen? I think we all wondered if Kubo would ever really be able to do justice to Yamamoto's Bankai, and I think that speaks volumes about just how powerful his Shikai is. None of us could even fathom what a Bankai would be. It's kind of similar for Kenpachi in a way, but I remember people speculating maybe it's the Sokyoku. Maybe he will literally bring down the sun in a fight. And I think that, again, speaks volumes for the power of Yamamoto's Zanpakuto itself. So I think that Kubo did do justice to Yama, and I think he did so by giving him clearly the most powerful Zanpakuto in the series. I think Ichibe's Ichimonji is broken enough to where he could stand a chance at defeating Yama in mitigating circumstances. If he splashes him first, it's probably over. But even then, it's hard to say. It's hard to say if Yamamoto's Bankai wouldn't just melt the ink away. If he activated it after he was covered. Really, really hard to say. But I'm happy putting Ryujin Jaka at number 1 on this list. In my opinion, it really has always been the showcase Zanpakuto that is used for spectacle, that is used to terrify enemies. I mean, the amount of characters that have been one-shot by this thing. When Yamamoto ignites Aeon, I love that moment so much. He takes out all 3 Tre Bestias in one hit. He wipes out 3 Sturmators in one hit. He kills Driscoll Percy in one hit. Like, I can go on. Yamamoto's sword is the most powerful Zanpakuto in Bleach, and I'm pretty happy putting it at number 1. So that's it for this pretty lengthy video, guys, ranking the Zanpakuto in terms of power. That is my top 10 strongest Zanpakuto list, but let me know where you think I've gone wrong. I can imagine some people probably not agreeing with it entirely, but I hope I've done a decent job of explaining my position, and I'd love to see yours, as always, in the comments below, guys. Let me know where you rank these swords, or if you're bringing in some others that I didn't include in this list. I'd be really interested to see. But until next time, guys, make sure you subscribe for more weekly Bleach content, and I'll see you then. Goodbye.